CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. China's President Xi Jinping holds talks with his Brazilian counterpart, Lula da Silva, in Beijing, with plans to deepen the two countries' relationship. Our other headlines. Germany's foreign minister in Beijing says a military escalation in the Taiwan Straits would be a horror scenario, while her Chinese counterpart calls it an internal matter. The moons of Jupiter blasts off from Earth. President Xi Jinping says China has made relations with Brazil a diplomatic priority. He welcomed his Brazilian counterpart, Lula da Silva, to Beijing for talks as part of a state visit to the country. President Xi called for deeper cooperation in sectors including agriculture, energy and infrastructure. The two leaders also discussed the Ukraine war and agreed that talks are the only way out of the crisis. Well, our correspondent Dai Kai is in Beijing. Dai Kai, it's been a packed day for the Brazilian president. Tell us more.
Exactly, Jamie. We learned that a special ceremony was held earlier today to welcome the Brazilian president on a state visit to China. Chinese President Xi Jinping led the ceremony at the East Gate of the Great Hall of the People in Beijing. As President Lula da Silva arrived, a military honor guard stood in formation and saluted him. The two heads of state then proceeded to the review stand, where they listened to the national anthems of both countries, accompanied by a military band. After the ceremony, President Xi and President Lula da Silva watched a parade by the Chinese People's Liberation Army Honor Guard on the review stand. The two presidents held talks afterward, and later that evening, President Xi hosted a welcome banquet for President Lula da Silva and his wife in the Golden Hall of the Great Hall of the People. Jamie?
And beyond the ceremonials, what's the focus of the talks between the two presidents?
Yes, so during their meeting, the two leaders discussed bilateral relations as well as regional and international issues of common concern. President Xi Jinping noted that China and Brazil are respectively the largest developing countries and important emerging market countries in the East and West Hemisphere. They are comprehensive strategic partners with broad common interests. The Chinese president stressed that this year marks the 30th anniversary of the establishment of China-Brazil strategic partnership. So both sides need to deepen cooperation, promote existing collaboration projects. He welcomed more high-quality Brazilian products into the Chinese market, adding that China is willing to explore the alignment of the Belt and Road Initiative with Brazil's reindustrialization strategy. President Lula da Silva said he was honored and proud to lead his delegation to visit China. He believed that deepening and expanding cooperation between Brazil and China would help Brazil's reindustrialization process and solve poverty-related issues. He says that Brazil is willing to strengthen strategic cooperation with China within the frameworks such as G20 and BRICS. So on the issue of Ukraine crisis, both sides agree that dialogue and negotiation are the only feasible way to solve the crisis, and they called on more countries to play a constructive role in promoting a solution to the Ukraine crisis. And after the meeting, the two heads of state witnessed the signing of a number of bilateral cooperation documents in the fields of trade, investment, digital economy, aerospace, and more. And they also issued a joint statement. Back to you in the studio, Jamie.
Dai Kai, thank you for that. Our correspondent Dai Kai in Beijing. Well, in an exclusive interview with CGTN, the Brazilian president said he hopes to see progress in the relationship between the two countries that goes beyond trade and the economy.
Primeiro, eu gostaria de estabelecer com a China uma parceria estratégica que pudesse durar muitas e muitas décadas. Segundo, é preciso avançar na relação do Brasil com a China, não apenas na questão econômica e na questão comercial. É importante que a gente avance um pouco na questão, científica e tecnológica. É preciso que a gente avance um pouco, nos convênios entre as universidades. É preciso mais chineses estudantes no Brasil Brasil e mais brasileiros estudando na China. Nós precisamos de estabelecer uma política em que a China se transforme em parceiro de investimentos no Brasil. E também eu quero discutir com o presidente Xi Jinping a questão da guerra da Rússia e da Ucrânia. Eu quero discutir a parceria espacial com os chineses, quero discutir, sabe, o investimento, por exemplo, da China na indústria automobilística brasileira. Ou seja, portanto, nós temos muitos assuntos, eu acho que vai ser uma visita muito proveitosa. Então, eu estou na China com muito otimismo, com muita vontade de que a gente possa avançar. Eu tive uma extraordinária relação com a China nos meus 2 primeiros mandatos e eu espero ter uma extraordinária relação com a China nesse meu 3º mandato.
Now, the rest of the day's news, and Germany's foreign minister says a military escalation in the Taiwan Straits would be a horror scenario. Annalena Baerbock is in Beijing meeting her Chinese counterpart, Qin Gang. China says relations with Taiwan are an internal affair on which it would not compromise, but that Beijing's goal was for a peaceful reunion. Baerbock's visit follows that of French President Emmanuel Macron. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Peter Oliver, watching events from Berlin. Peter, what more can you tell us about this visit and these speeches?
Right, well, Annalena Baerbock, German Foreign Minister, did mention the situation in Taiwan, saying that if a military escalation there would be a horror scenario. She went to point out, that 50% of world trade passes through the Taiwan Straits, and that any escalations there would have a knock-on effect globally, and that Europe wanted to avoid seeing that. It was pointed out by Qin Gang, the Chinese foreign minister, that any issues with Taiwan were an internal matter for China, and that Beijing would not move from its position, which was peaceful reunion between Taiwan and the mainland.
It's quite a shift in tone, isn't it, from what France's president said about Europe not being drawn into the Taiwan situation?
It was always expected that Annalena Baerbock would say something a little different to Emmanuel Macron, because what the French president had said had, well, upset so many people, not just in Europe, but also in the United States, because what the French president had said essentially was that Europe should avoid being led into a crisis over Taiwan by the United States. It upset a lot of people. Annalena Baerbock is probably the perfect person, if you were upset by that, to come here, because her foreign policy very closely tied to that of the United States. So she did go to Beijing, and she did say that Europe wants to avoid that escalation there, and that's exactly why she was the person to do this. And yeah, we pretty much were expecting that she would say something like she did.
And another subject close to the top of the agenda, what was discussed on the war in Ukraine?
Right, what we heard from the German side was them looking for China to speak directly to Russia, to use the influence they have to try and get sides to end hostilities in this ongoing conflict. From the Chinese side, Qin Gang said that China remains committed to peace, that they want to promote peace, to promote talks, and continue to try and get both sides to talk to one another as opposed to continuing the violence.
Peter, thank you for that. Our correspondent, Peter Oliver, in Berlin. Within the next few hours, a French court is expected to rule whether President Emmanuel Macron's controversial pension reforms are legal and constitutional. His proposal to raise the legal retirement age from 62 to 64 has sparked weeks of often violent protest. If approved by the country's highest court, the reforms could be enacted as early as next week. A powerful tropical storm has hit Western Australia with record high winds, but most populated areas have been spared from major damage. Cyclone Isla struck before midnight close to Port Hedland, the world's largest iron ore export hub. It's since downgraded to a Category 3, but a red alert remains in place for some inland communities. A once-in-a-millennium flood has deluged southeast Florida in the United States, with 62 centimeters of rain falling over the past few days. 2 million people were placed under a flood warning after Fort Lauderdale saw its rainiest day ever, with a month's rain falling in 1 hour. Fort Lauderdale Airport was forced to close and is due to reopen later. Meanwhile, Florida's Republican governor, Ron DeSantis, has signed a bill into law that bans most abortions after 6 weeks. Opponents argue this is before many women know they're pregnant. DeSantis said the law would transform Florida into a pro-life state. Currently, the state allows abortions up to 15 weeks. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, destination Jupiter. Europe's mission to the icy moons has at last lifted off from planet Earth.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. China's President Xi Jinping holds talks with his Brazilian counterpart, Lula da Silva, in Beijing, with plans to deepen the two countries' relationship. Our other headlines: Germany's foreign minister is in Beijing and says a military escalation in the Taiwan Straits would be a horror scenario, while her Chinese counterpart calls it an internal matter. Well, let's take you back to our top story now. Sergio Amaral is the former Minister for Trade and Industry of Brazil. He's also the Brazilian ambassador to Washington and chairman of Brazil-China Business Council. Mr. Ambassador, welcome. Good to have your company. Lula's meeting with China's President Xi Jinping comes just a day after he criticized the power of the US dollar and the International Monetary Fund. What does he want from China?
Lula wants to increase and deepen Brazilian and Chinese relations. And I'm very happy, as former president of the China-Brazil Business Council, to see that we are not only moving ahead, we are moving up. Because it's no longer only trade, it's no longer only investment, it's not only investment by Brazilian and Chinese companies. We are moving up to some strategic issues, like finance, in which a Brazilian and a Chinese bank set up an agreement in order to favor and promote trade in local currency. This means that we are going to use more yuan and reais to promote our trade. But it's not only that. We are reaching areas of technology, and we are happy that Huawei took part in the Brazilian program for telecom. And we are also moving towards a stronger relationship in the area of new energies, like, for instance, the use of electric cars. So we are making a considerable progress by entering the financial area, and we are doing that in fully accordance with our own values, with our own economic interests, and 200 Brazilian companies are in Beijing now to foster this relationship.
Mr. Ambassador, what does China want from Brazil?
I think we share the same purposes. It's increase further trade, investment, technology partnership, and also to enter the financial area as a means with the BRICS of helping to reform the international system.
China's investments are obviously crucial for Brazil, but I wonder how that might influence or change Brazil's relationship with the United States.
We are going ahead with our cooperation with the United States and as well as with China. They are both countries very close friends to Brazilian, and we don't want to promote one of them in detriment of the other. Brazil is a very big country. There is room for both. But of course, this visit has highlighted some important aspects of this relationship that some people ignored.
You're an old hand when it comes to the diplomatic game. You're a seasoned politician, a seasoned ambassador. Let me ask you how important this personal relationship is between these two presidents.
I think that's very important. We already have with China a mechanism called COSBAN, which is a high-level meeting of discussing our cooperation. And it showed to be very useful because we all really have a strategic cooperation and we have a roadmap to our cooperation. We want to discuss new areas as well as improve some other areas in which you might make more progress. It's a very positive meeting, and it will open up the way for a further cooperation at more strategic level.
Mr. Ambassador, good to have your company, and thank you very much indeed for your thoughts. That's Sergio Amaral, the former Minister for Trade and Industry of Brazil, and also the Brazilian ambassador to Washington. Nearly 900 prisoners are being released as part of a deal between the warring sides in Yemen's long-running conflict. Dozens of detainees have arrived in Sana'a and Aden in one of the most significant exchanges between the Saudi-led coalition and Iran-backed Houthi rebels. The deal, overseen by the International Committee of the Red Cross, comes as officials agreed to hold another round of peace talks. Well, it was second time lucky for the European Space Agency's most ambitious mission yet. The mission to the icy moons of Jupiter has blasted away from Earth after being postponed yesterday due to lightning at the launch site in French Guiana. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Trent Murray in the German city of Darmstadt, home to the European Space Agency. Trent, clearly a very exciting day there after yesterday's disappointment.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say, Jamie. In fact, they've just started passing around the champagne, which I think is a very good sign of how they are feeling right now. You really could have heard a pin drop during that moment of launch, with everybody here waiting anxiously, hoping that it would all go to plan. And it seems that it has in the past 2 hours. We know that all of those critical milestones were hit. The launch vehicle was able to separate from the spacecraft, that JUICE spacecraft on its way to Jupiter. It was then able to successfully connect back here to the control centre using its first ground station in Western Australia. And then really the final and most important stage of what we will see today was when those giant arrays, those solar arrays, were able to successfully extend and effectively begin to pick up that solar power that it's going to need to make that long journey. It's important to note it's not going to be one straight line to Jupiter. It's going to do a couple of loops of the Earth as well as our moon and the planet Venus, and that's effectively to try and suck up some gravity, if you will, to try and slingshot itself out on that 8-year journey. But so far, it seems everything has gone very well and to plan today, and they are continuing now to communicate with that spacecraft as it travels away from Earth.
Trent, what are they hoping to get out of this mission?
Well, when you speak to scientists here, they say that effectively what they are out there looking for is whether these 3 moons off the planet Jupiter could be habitable. Could there be life down there? And the reason for that is because there is water on those 3 moons, Ganymede, Europa and Callisto. Now, underneath effectively about a 100-kilometre surface of ice, they believe there is that liquid water, that subsurface ocean, and they want to just try and get very up and close with this spacecraft in order to use very specialised and sensitive probes to try and gather more data, try and gather more information, and then transmit it back here to Earth so the world scientists can pore over it and try and find a bit more information. The real one I think we're looking out for when you speak to folks here is that Ganymede. It is the biggest one. It's got 6 times the amount of water as Earth, and they really, as I say, want to get up close to that one because it also has a magnetic field. And in the words of one of the scientists I spoke to here, when you've got water and you've got a magnetic field protecting the planet from harmful radiation, you do start to get the building blocks of life. Maybe. It's a big maybe. We'll have to wait 8 years to find out, Jamie.
Trent, we'll talk to you in 8 years' time. For the moment, thank you very much. Our correspondent, Trent Murray, at the home of the European Space Agency. Let's talk now to Dr. Fabio Favata from the European Space Agency. Dr. Favata, good to see you. I mean, this is one of the European Space Agency's most ambitious missions. It surely is a proud moment to see liftoff.
Indeed, there is. It has been a very emotional day, not least because the launch was postponed yesterday because of weather, but now it has been a picture-perfect launch. Everything has been nominal, everything has been beautiful. Emotions have been relieved, and now everybody is looking forward to the cruise phase and, in the end, to the actual scientific measurements to be performed by the mission.
I know you're not looking for signs of life, but you are looking for signs of well, supporting mechanisms for life, aren't you? Explain that.
Well, yes. I mean, signs of life is very ambitious, but certainly liquid water is a prerequisite for life as we know it. And Ganymede, together with other ice moons of Jupiter and Saturn, has plenty of it. So it's certainly the ideal place in which to look for such life in the solar system. So JUICE will orbit Ganymede, the first ever spacecraft to orbit a moon of another solar system body, and will map its surface, will map the thickness of the ice. Ganymede is a magnetic field. Will measure everything that we can possibly measure from orbit, and therefore try and establish if really this could be a potential exobiological site in our solar system.
I know you've got all sorts of research equipment on board. What specific experiments are you going to be conducting?
Well, again, it's a holistic view of the moon where all the instruments will work together. As I said, there is a magnetometer, there is a subsurface radar, there are plenty of cameras, there are spectrographs. It is really a question not necessarily of a single experiment, as much as really getting through the view of the moon as one possibly can and its internal structure.
We were just hearing it's going to take 8 years just to get to Jupiter. How complex is this whole mission, and how long until we get some data fed back from this?
Well, it's a long trip and it's a complicated one. Getting to Jupiter directly requires lots of energy, and therefore that's why we opted for a bit more complex trajectory, which makes use of the energy, gravitational energy of a number of bodies in our solar system, including our own Earth, to go there through a rather complex trajectory. This makes for a much more complex mission operationally than it would otherwise be the case if this would be a direct trajectory. And so this makes for a complex mission. We're also using solar panels, so very big solar panels, very efficient solar panels. It is a mission that requires all sorts of inventiveness and resources. As you've said, it's 8 years cruise, after which we'll start acquiring data. So for the scientists involved, there is a bit of a long wait. It will take about another 9-10 years before we really have a complex integrated view of Ganymede, but it's worth the wait.
If you were a betting man, which planet do you think will be the first to show us signs of some kind of life? Is it going to be Jupiter or Mars or Saturn?
Well, I do believe that the icy moons of both Jupiter and Saturn are our best bet because of the liquid oceans under the surface. Now, for example, Callisto, which is one of the moons of Saturn, has already shown interesting plumes with evidence of organic material. Now, if you ask me whether it's going to be Jupiter or Saturn, I think the odds are even, but those are my best bets for extrabiological sites in the solar system.
I guess you and I are the same sort of age. Our generation was inspired by all of those moon missions seemingly a lifetime ago. How important is this mission to inspiring a new generation?
Well, you're perfectly right. I have a very vivid memory of watching Armstrong set foot on the moon when I was a little kid. And I think it's very important to maintain the flame burning, inspire the young generation. And I think showing that we can explore faraway bodies much farther away than the moon that actually have a real potential for life is an amazing inspirational value.
Dr. Hrvata, good luck with the coming months and years, in fact. Come back on the show soon and update us. That's Dr. Fabio Hrvata from the European Space Agency.
Thank you very much.
The headlines again. China's President Xi Jinping holds talks with his Brazilian counterpart, Lula da Silva, in Beijing, with plans to deepen the two countries' relationship. Our other headlines, Germany's foreign minister is in Beijing and says a military escalation in the Taiwan Straits would be a horror scenario, while her Chinese counterpart calls it an internal matter. And Europe's mission to the icy moons of Jupiter has lifted off from Earth at last. And that is the world today. Thank you for watching. There's more news on CGTN Europe's channel, on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Hi there and welcome to weather forecast over to Europe. Under influence of low vortex, there will be widespread precipitation over the next 2 days. See Saturday, light to moderate rainfall picking up in much of UK, France, and also Germany, Poland, all the way down to Balkans as well as Italy. As we start to Sunday, you can see partly sunny sky or clear conditions in southern UK and much of France. But wet weather conditions in parts of Central and Eastern Europe will continue to happen. For example, we'll have light rainfall for folks in cities like Berlin and Warsaw, with daily heights around 14 or 17 respectively. Down to the city of Vienna, you can see partly sunny sky on Sunday, daily heights be around 15. Speaking of temperature, although there is some precipitation developing, the daily heights will continue to rise over the next couple of days. For example, you will have upper teens for daily heights in the west, but if you're living in northern portion, be sure to notice big temperature gap during the day and night. At our business and travel outlook Sunday, we will have shine of 20 degrees for folks in London, overcast sky in Paris 17 to 5. Around 10 degrees warmer for folks in Madrid and Lisbon, clearing conditions this Sunday. Well, that's it for now. Stay tuned for more city forecast.